Welcome to the Invero Show, where the team from Invero brings together thought leaders from our customers and partners to share our combined knowledge of the Microsoft Cloud ecosystem with the world in hopes of helping you along your cloud journey. And now for today's episode.
Let's kick it off. So hello, everybody. Good morning if you're on the West Coast. Good afternoon if you're any further east. Thanks so much for joining this edition of the Invero Show, where we're going to unpack the conversation around creating a culture of innovation through application modernization. I am so pleased to have our three panelists join me today. Just quick introductions here of our panelists. Mike Sparling is the COO and CTO at Multi-Health Systems, one of our great clients and a great Microsoft Canada client based in Toronto. We've got another Mike in the conversation here, Mike Thibodeau from Microsoft, long-standing Microsoft leader and currently leading the app innovation and AI space for Microsoft Canada. And then our very own Craig Slack, the founder and CTO of Invero. And these three gents are going to participate with me in unpacking this conversation with real world examples, having walked a mile or 10,000 hours plus in those shoes of navigating the trials and the tribulations of app innovation and how that can contribute to the effectiveness of their business. For those that I haven't met before, my name is Shawn Ambrose. I am part of the leadership team here at Invero, and today I am pleased to be the Invero Show host. So without further ado, let's jump into our agenda and get this rolling. The last couple shows, I've just kind of covered off this first bit here of just setting the stage and teeing this up of why is this worth learning about. We thank you all very much for investing your time into the conversation here today. Let's just kind of ground this thing. Why are we going to spend this time? And then I'll just spend a minute on how does this fit into Invero's go-to-market. Our audience would have a varying degree of familiarity with Invero, so I'll just take a moment and kind of plug into how does that fit into what we do. And then Mike Thibodeau from Microsoft is just going to spend a couple minutes on a presentation just to kind of frame the panel discussion on unlocking the power of AI and app innovation. And I love that you've got both of those scopes of responsibility in your role at Microsoft, and moreover, the presentation you're going to deliver, because app innovation in itself is a very interesting topic, but AI is just everywhere, right? And the two of them really tie in together. And so I'm really excited for you to bring that piece to life. And then we're going to jump into this panel discussion where Mike and Craig are going to, as I say, they're going to go through some real life examples of what they've worked through on the business, the technical benefits they've received, but also the constraints that they've faced and how they've navigated them, how that's unlocked new potential in their business. But really that spirit of this around the culture of innovation, we're talking about people, and how is it that the people that are ultimately the most valuable asset of any business, how is it that they can do more? How is it that they can become a next version of themselves through that process? And how does that turn into better business outcomes and a better employee experience for them and a better career journey? And then we'll talk a bit about how do you get started? Like what would you guys suggest? What have you done? That kind of thing. And then we'll wrap it up with how can Invero help for those that are interested in going a little further into the journey. So I'll just briefly tee this up of why is this worth learning about? And in this topic of app innovation, there's many benefits. We could create I think if the four of us brainstorm here, probably come up with 100 plus things of why this could be great. Here's a few of the potential benefits around app innovation. It can certainly help improve efficiency and productivity, automation. All of those things can be realized. You can reduce your maintenance costs and your support costs of your applications. You can improve your security posture significantly, and you can really improve, probably the biggest one there is you can improve the user experience. The user experience for your internal stakeholders, or perhaps it's your clients, depending on how your business operates and how you interface your technology with them. And ultimately, that's going to yield you a competitive advantage. So that all sounds great. Like, let's just get going, right? But wait, there's some headwinds, there's some challenges. It's just not that simple, right? There's also risks that come along with that of, well, it all sounds great, but it's actually going to disrupt the business process. What you've got going today, it may be suboptimal, but it's working. Actually, Mike Thibodeau, I saw your post earlier today on LinkedIn that is really on point to that of you got a business that things are functioning. They're looking for that next space of innovation and opportunity, but it's a bit of that innovator's dilemma. You've got something working, and how do you create that innovation without completely destroying what you've got today? And I thought your post was really on point on how to build on that and do it in a very graduated way. This can create integration issues. It can create compatibility challenges, cost overruns. This is an area that is concerning. You can get into a project, and whether it's your internal folks or consulting organizations, all of a sudden that can get away on you. And these are things you got to really think through before you get too far into it. Security risk. So I said earlier, it can increase your security, but you've also added a whole bunch of different variables in which can also create new considerations for security. So it kind of shows up on both. And then skills mismatch is a big part, because you may not have the people that have the capabilities to take this further. So it on one hand, great potential benefits, let's go. On the other hand, hang on a second, let's just pump those brakes a little bit and think this through. So I love that our panelists here have a wealth of experience to unpack this and look at it really from both angles. But ultimately, you got to make progress, right? Like you can't just stay. If you just stay in the mode that you're in, the world will pass you by. So you've got to challenge yourself to go forward bit by bit, whatever incremental step that is. So hopefully that sets the stage to our audience of why are you here? Why are you investing an hour with us today, which we're really grateful for. Just real quick, for those that are less familiar with Invero's go-to-market, here's Invero on a page. I'll start on the bottom of why does Invero exist? What do we get up every day and think about? Our purpose is to help clients maximize the value of their investment in Microsoft and make business better through that process. For most of our clients, Microsoft tends to be in the top 3 of their spend, because it's a very strategic partnership to them and a strategic investment. But it also means that, like, the bigger your investments, the more the need is to make sure you're getting the maximum value out of that. So that's Invero's purpose. And so how do we go about that? If I draw your eyes to the top left, it's what we do and it's all we do. We focus completely on Microsoft. So we're not distracted by other opportunities, other things that we can think about. And we really feel strongly that level of focus creates a craft mastery of depth. Secondly, something that I've certainly learned over my couple of decades in this business is when you're navigating the Microsoft ecosystem, for every architectural consideration, there's a licensing consideration. So Invero has invested heavily in our skills and our capability around our Microsoft licensing practice. Actually, I see that Steph is on here, who is just the best in the business and leading our Microsoft license practice, and really helps our clients navigate between the architectural side as well as the license side. So thanks for joining us here, Steph. And then last but not least, we have a really strong partner network. So there's a lot that Invero does, you see on this slide. At the same time, we can't be everything to everyone. So we've built this great partner ecosystem to fill in some of those gaps along the way. Now, as it pertains to this conversation around app innovation, you can see it right here of app modernization. This is absolutely core, pardon the pun there, where you see above Azure core. It is core to what we do. For those less familiar, Invero started in 2017. Craig started the organization really when Azure moved into Canada and said, hey, I've got a deep background here. I'm an entrepreneur. I want to build a business to help clients realize this value. And our business at Invero started in the infrastructure space, but it didn't take long before it moved into the app modernization, app innovation space. Because the way I would see it is moving your infrastructure into a hyperscale public cloud is fantastic. It gives you a whole bunch of benefit if you compare to the alternative of on-premise. But the real value of cloud shows up when you start to think about it at an application level. So for Invero, it didn't take long for us to make that extension of our capability from thinking about VM migrations and landing zones to actually creating the app innovation and modernization itself. So if I just unpack that a little bit deeper, here's what we're talking about. And this is really from a technology nuts and bolts standpoint of, we're talking about DevOps, and we're talking about pipelines, and we're talking about automation and pushing infrastructure as code, things like that. Those are all the technology bits and bytes. But let's take it up a level to a business conversation, and then ultimately it shows up in the technology kind of more towards the end of how you go and execute. But it really starts with a business conversation. So with that, Mike T, I'm going to pass it over to you, and I'll just be the guide here to walk through your slides.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Shawn. I think I'll make sure we get through the slides and not too much time so that we can have a great facilitated dialogue. And I think you queued up a lot of this well. For anyone that joined a little bit late or that needs a reminder, my name is Mike Thibodeau. I am the app innovation and AI lead here in our mid-level enterprise space at Microsoft Canada. And if we want to go to the next slide, I think the goal here is just to talk to everyone a little bit about um, where and why we're having the conversation today. And I think Shawn queued it up well, but the reality is the world is moving into the digital space faster than ever before. And I think if we reflect back also even to the time of COVID, I think we see that companies that have embraced digital in advance of that were a little bit more prepared to weather the storm. And so if you go to the next slide, um, the reality is we're at another pivotal moment where people are going to be asked or be thinking about where and how AI is shifting business today. And it's changing it for everyone. I mean, in your personal lives, I'm sure you all have a story, whether that's a Microsoft Copilot at work, a Microsoft Copilot for your search, or something like ChatGPT. I think the moment of when this really hit for me was when my dad started sending very elaborate poems in the group chat. My dad is not technology savvy, and when that happened, I realized this is truly a moment where the accessibility of AI is there for everyone. And it has become far more democratized and accessible, which means we need to be thinking about where and how it's also going to impact not just every individual, but every team and every industry. If you want to switch to the next slide there, Shawn, I think, stat for impressive purposes, but there's a Forrester study that said 83% of enterprise decision makers plan to increase AI spend this year. And while that's an impressive stat, on what, why, and how is equally important to understand. I think that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. And you will find that despite my role being in app innovation, I do like to talk about the spectrum and everyone finding the right thing for them and their organization. We'll flip over to the next slide because at its core, we're really seeing innovation everywhere. A great deal of this is powered by applications and technology, but the types of apps and how you build those apps is going to be different. And what I mean by that is we'll talk about things that are readily available off the shelf, all the way to things that are developed with pro code. But there's no industry that is not already being innovated, not just because of AI, but because of how consumers interact with your brand and how people at your company and within your industry collaborate together. So if you flip to the next slide, this is the one I want to spend time on for like a few more seconds. This is sort of a framing that I've liked to create that helps me in a lot of the dialogues we're having left to right across the country. And I frame this as sort of the use it, build it, break it. And the reason I do that is because I think it's super important for people to be intentional about what they're trying to achieve. So when you think about applications, there's always a category which we would consider use it. These are off-the-shelf applications to improve the way we do work or productivity. From a Microsoft perspective, that would be your Microsoft 365, that would be Dynamics. These are things that you can just purchase and they're ready to use. In the same way, sort of jumping from 1 to 4, there's the exact same way we need to be thinking about AI, which is, are there solutions, packaged things, ready off the shelf applications that can help improve the productivity that you're looking for? Again, in the Microsoft sense, that would be our great suite of copilots that have made their way into all of our product sets. And where and how can Copilot help enhance your experiences? And then when we talk about the build it and break it, are there areas where Copilot, despite being amazing in so many things, falls a little bit short about something you're trying to achieve? So the next category is really the build it. And these are where custom applications come in. And there's a spectrum from things like Copilot Studio, which allows you to take low code scenarios, even with pro code developers, to very quickly achieve some amazing results around what's possible with applications in AI. And so a lot of times when people are building it, this is because it's something that is core to their business, core to their intellectual property, and a competitive advantage. There's companies that are born with build it scenarios that are an app first organization. These are software companies. These are brands that interact in a digital way with you. Netflix, as an example. In the same way, there's AI Build It, which is if you have applications that are core to your business model, external or internal facing, where and how are you thinking about maybe appending AI capabilities to them to enhance what they can do? And then the last category is break it. And this one exists again in usual software, but also in the world of AI, which is there some opportunity that you see to disrupt? And that is either to disrupt your existing industry with things you already have by building a net new application. Generally, these are external facing, but they can be internal facing as well. And do you see a need and a value in going through the effort of not just using something, not just buying something that exists, not just building it onto what you already have, but completely disrupting and building something completely net new, whether that be for the purpose of the software or software related to AI. So I think this is an important framing because it helps people understand that while you might be looking to understand where and how you go forward around apps and AI, one of the scenarios can actually be, is there something readily available that I can tap into? And maybe it's about adopting that and taking it to its fullest potential and then figuring out where the next step is for you to build it alongside something you already have or break it and completely disrupt. So if you want to go to the next slide, Shawn, I think an important thing to think about when you talk about the build it or break it categories is your existing applications. And the reality is it falls into these two buckets. You could be modernizing an existing application. So something that you've had already as an application for many years. It could be on-prem. It could already be in the cloud. It being in the cloud doesn't mean it's been modernized. And where and how do you need to think about what you do with those applications to make sure that they are ready for growth as an organization, with or without AI? In the same vein, as you build new applications, making sure that you're building them in the present form with new cloud native technologies so that you build it right from the start. And sometimes you're going to be doing a bit of both. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. Next slide. And I think there might be a little bit of a build. So if you want to click, let's call it 4 times. I think it's like 4. Yeah, that felt right. That was pretty good, right? Which is why do businesses modernize? And I think Shawn talked about some of this at the beginning. We're going to talk about some of this today. The ones I like to focus on most are those that actually drive massive organizational change for your company. And those are things around competitive disruption and where and how you can disrupt, not be disrupt. Changes around new business opportunities and how you go after those and how you innovate faster. I think oftentimes we always think about modernizing for the, industry regulations and optimizing costs. And those are all amazing reasons. But when you think about it, you should equally be thinking about how this helps you activate against new revenue opportunities, not just a cost optimization exercise. If you're doing it solely for cost optimization, that's fine. But I think that's probably the wrong way of why you're thinking about modernization. It's about setting yourself up for growth, for reduced downtime, for enhanced capabilities that are going to naturally be needed. And so you need to make sure that you're balancing the things that need to be done for optimization with the things that need to be done for growth. You want to flip to the next slide, just to make sure that we're squaring it away with the AI dialogue. Generative AI will make apps. It says makes apps, but I say will make apps because it depends on what your apps are doing. Will make apps truly intelligent. When you think about the way traditional customer experiences or user experiences with applications exist, there's constrained interactions that are already pre-configured. There's hard-coded and fixed data sets many times. And to change things dramatically could be complex or costly. And maybe, pushing updates could take you a full year to make the latest updates. And that's going to mean that you're probably falling behind, especially in a world where, as we talked about earlier, AI is extremely pervasive and your customers will be demanding it. And will be expecting it and how they interact with your brand. They'll be expecting natural language interactions with your applications and your brand. They'll be thinking about how data-driven personalized experiences come to life, and those will make their lives feel like they are enhanced, and they will have quicker feature delivery from you as an organization. And so that paradigm shift is the one we want to talk about today. There's going to be different areas you are within this journey. There'll be elements that are things that you need to modernize. There'll be things you're building that new, and you might be tackling both at the same time, and that's totally okay. But I think if you flip to the next slide, that's sort of where I'll leave off and open up for our discussion. The point I want to make is the opportunity is actually just yours. It's yours to lead the AI transformation. It's yours to innovate and enhance customer experiences. And I'm sure we'll have a wide variety of roles listening in today, from those within the technology parts of the organization to those in product, marketing, finance, legal. And I want to make sure that we embrace including all of them in the discussion, because it's super important. If we hold this conversation only within the walls of IT, we're going to miss things, and we're going to miss this innovation in the way people are thinking about new experiences. And, ultimately coming out of today, if there's one thing I hope that you all take away, is that the opportunity is yours to lead in this new AI transformation, and we hope that you embrace it. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Shawn, and look forward to having a bit of a dialogue around this.
Yeah, you bet, Mike. Thanks so much for teeing this up further here. So I'm going to drop the screen share, and we're just going to have a chat now. Mike Sparling, maybe I'll start with you. Thanks again so much to all of you. But Mike, thanks for joining us here. And Mike T, you talked about the importance of the stakeholders being within IT, but also beyond IT, right? Mike, you hold a really interesting role in that you are the head of the technology department, but you're also the chief operating officer. It puts you squarely like one leg in the technology and one leg in the business. Maybe let's just start there. Talk to us a bit about what innovation means to you through the lens of being the CTO and the COO all at the same time.
Yeah, certainly, Shawn. And some days it feels like you have to be very flexible because those legs get spread quite far apart, don't they? But
Yeah.
I'm very lucky that when I came to Multi-Health Systems a little over 6 years ago, we're a biotech, global biotech working in neuroscience. And so, while we weren't as deeply digital as we are now, we knew 6 years ago that we needed to be a much more nimble, inventive, and digital organization. And at the time, my CEO that I first came to, more recently, we've had a change to a new CEO, both really are focused on advancing the digital practice over anything else. And so really, although it's unusual to be a technology person and an operator, it's a real strength when you're trying to be digital to the core. And I think that Mike T's slides really set up the fact that we are in an age of accelerated innovation. If you just look at what AI 5 years ago did to what AI 5 months ago did and to what AI 5 hours ago was announcing, you really get a sense of how much that transformation has taken place. And, looking in the Microsoft world, Copilots will change how we do a great amount of our work. It will enhance our ability to do science. It will speed our access to market. And it will really bring people who often didn't collaborate together in collaboration workspaces, principally in teams because we are distributed. But that sort of permeation of intelligence requires us to think digital. It requires us to really understand our operations through a digital lens. And it requires us to take some managed risks as we look out into the technology sphere and say, these are, I always hate the word bets because it sounds like we're gambling, when in reality, what we're doing is we're appreciating opportunity and piloting to see if those opportunities fit our organization. But I think it's a good synthesis. If you fully understand how the business operates, how a dollar starts at the top and winds up at the bottom of the organization from that standpoint, it does change how you look at innovation. And it very much transforms architecture, because we started our focus on architecture first and said anything monolithic, anything tightly coupled will not survive the things that are happening into the future. And teed us up nicely because AI can look into our data, it can look into our process, and it can begin to make recommendation as a collaborator to find ways to, as Mike teed up, to create apps that will give us competitive advantage.
I
Yeah,
want to just double
jump
click
in,
on
Craig,
that
please.
there. Yeah, Mike, I think you hit on a very key point around piloting and doing experimentation in the concept of, an innovative culture, whether it's AI or some other innovation. I think that's one thing that's often overlooked is it's good to experiment and fail fast, learn from those failures, move on, kind of building on your skill sets too, because as technology changes, I know, Mike S, you've gone through this in your team where you're skilling up on, cloud first and so on and so forth, trying to then do that as well as being innovative. I think it kind of goes hand in hand. You can actually build those skills while you're experimenting, picking a use case or a few use cases in your environment that can add value, but you're not sure how it's going to work, and just building those proof of concepts and experimenting. So I think that's a great point that you hit on there.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, Mike, we've been working with you and your organization here for, I think, going on maybe 2.5 years or so. Certainly beyond my time at Invero, and you guys are a fun bunch to work with because you push that envelope, you call them the bets, right? You challenge yourselves to constantly look at the art of the possible, as opposed to staying in the safe, this is how we've been doing it for 20 years kind of thing. How do you drive that? Because I think often there's a human nature tendency of like, hey, it's not broke, just leave it. It's working. No one's, nothing. The sky's not falling here. How do you drive that from a leadership point of view to challenge your team to upskill themselves and push those limits, and also feel safe for experimentation, because you know that failure is going to show up in there.
Yeah.
And if people fear failure, they won't take risks.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I like to describe the journey at Multi-Health Systems that I've led. When I arrived, we were an extremely cautious organization. That people were. It was a combination of 35 years of legacy, a lot of technology that people created and were no longer with the company. Documentation and system knowledge probably has a half-life of each person it gets handed off to. And so 10 years later, there's this myth about don't go near that box because if you sneeze, something bad will happen. And so we were very cautious. We were risk averse at exploring and taking opportunity square on. And yet our need was to transform and be much more confident in the way that we approach things. And so I would often say to people, we've got to transition from cautious to confident. And that means learn your architecture, think in isolation. So not isolation, meaning go away by yourself and think, but always find ways to put layering into the architecture. No matter what you're doing, find a way to separate something that's this big into two things that it's that big and have a defined interface between it. An API, a data exchange, even a workflow. Go onto Azure and you start saying, well, what I used to write in C#, often I can put into a logic app. And by moving workflow into logic apps, as an example, you begin to see more about how that workflow executes. You see more traceability, more insight, and more people can sit together and look at a workflow than can look at, a GitHub C# code screen. And so finding that way to be confident as we make change was really crucial. And that begins to give people a space where they're comfortable thinking differently and celebrate beyond belief. Get on Teams every day, get on whatever the platforms that you can reach out to people and cheerlead nonstop as a leader, accomplishments and failures, and celebrate when you've had to take something off the table as much as when you put something into production. And I think the real transition all of us would have gone through in our careers to get to where we are is there is that point where you begin to understand that failure isn't terrible if it's managed correctly, that you only grow by mistake, not by execution. And you have to create space where people understand that you're not being punitive or sort of in their face. You're really there to be their coach, to play the game with them and to help them along. And so I just wrap up and say one of the real powerful things that a mentor taught me probably 15 years ago, and I use it every day, is when I'm talking with someone, I consistently say, I'm asking this out of curiosity, not out of concern. So I'm not trying to probe into the work that you're doing or propose an alternate idea or ask what your framing was as to why you arrived at this particular outcome out of concern. I'm actually curious. I'm intellectually curious and want to learn what got you here. And in the course of doing that, we may pivot to another place, but it comes from a source of comfort to people as opposed to challenge.
Yeah, I love that, Mike. Thanks so much for that. And all of it was great, but like that last part there around curiosity, like, yeah, when you have curiosity, you're interested, you're looking deeper into things. When you have concern, you're very guarded, right? And so to create that culture there is fantastic. Mike T, I'll ask you. You have the opportunity to work with and interact with lots of as Microsoft defines the SMC, kind of that mid market of Canada. What do you see? What do you see companies and people in those companies? What are they curious about?
Yeah, I think there's try to kind of bundle it into one thing. It's curious about what others are doing and how they're approaching it. I think there's, whether that be apps or AI, I think it's technology teams wondering, hey, like we're always running at capacity. We know that this needs to get done. How are others finding the time? And all the way to, hey, we know we need to do things related to AI, whether that be adopting existing solutions that are already pre-built, so buy it, to build it, and where and how are others doing that? And there's risk around AI, so how are they embracing that? I think if I were to bring it all together, the answer on all of it is feel free to ask for help. So I think there's the first part around like teams are at capacity, but if we leverage support of a partner, like we're not going to know how it was all done, or we're not going to understand all of it or learn it ourselves. I think there's like a little bit of a myth there, and the reason I say that is how many things about your existing applications do you not know the answer to right now because people have left the company? And so maybe, finding elements of how you augment your team and do this together on a journey. And I don't just mean like hire vendor bodies to kind of extend your team. Like do this alongside, go on the journey, augment the capacity, figure out if there's things that are like, something you could take off the team's time and outsource to embrace that component, because there's people that do that every day and they're experts at that every day. I don't know if this is a good analogy. I'm just making it up on the spot. But if I need to redo my lawn, I'm not going to be so stubborn as to wait till the day I have time to install new sod just because I'm the one that's going to have to maintain it. Like there's some different elements of what I need to know and where I need to do all of it myself. So I think ask for help or do it with help. Don't feel like you have to wait until your team's going to have the capacity to prioritize this. The answer is, I've looked left to right across the country. No one has time. No one finds time. You will always be busy. So you need to deliberately prioritize it. Similarly on AI, I think it's like, if you think about it as like, we want to test something and pilot something and try some, by all means, do those things. But if you're looking for the perfect moment of when to release elements of AI capabilities internally at your organization or externally, the time was yesterday. I think it's like going on an iterative journey. And I think to the point Mike called out, like you need this culture of continuous learning and trial and error. That's how you're going to do it. You do need to put in the right scaffolding around learning and development. But by all means, you're going to find people within your organization that are natural power users that want to be advocates. Embrace them as part of the learning and development journey. If you're testing an application and trying to leverage AI, don't just like do it and tinker internally. Like if you go look at, I spend a lot of time talking to startups on my podcast. Things startups do amazing is they put something out that's not perfect and allow their customers to iterate with them. And trust me, they appreciate that. Instead of just thinking you know what the answer is that all your customers need, iterate them. Be transparent that this is something you're piloting. Offer it to a couple of your customers alongside your application. Maybe not all. Or if you release it, just similar to anything else you do. I think the famous one everyone worries about is like a chatbot, uh, leveraging AI. What could it tell a customer? Well, what could a service rep tell a customer? I think the idea is if you just depend on the technology doing everything, you might be disappointed because the reality is you're iterating, it's iterating. Your information across your site might have gaps in it. But what are the processes that you're putting in place? This is a business change. If something should go wrong, you just need the policies to adopt, update, change, make it right. It's part of the learning process. So I think it's embrace help. Otherwise, it'll always become deprioritized until it's so urgent that it's problematic. And pilot and test, and don't just test internally. Test with your customers. Allow them to be part of this. I guarantee they're asking for it. And then the last thing that maybe it's not something I'm being asked for, but something I'm seeing of those who are going further faster. Mike has the benefit of sort of wearing both hats. I don't see that uniformly at all customers, where the technology team and the product team and the marketing team, whoever owns the external experience and the internal support, need to come together. Don't think of this as we're trying to learn all the cool IT things and technology things and then bring it to the organization. Bring them into the fold, because I think the best of, I'm seeing them work really well together and move really fast and bring the customers into the fold. The worst of, they're going down completely separate paths and buying duplicate technology. Whether you're willing to admit that or not, when I talk to them, they're doing it. They have their own budgets. And so come together and bring this together as an organizational benefit, where you work together hand in hand, especially around the different elements of AI, because there's so many elements of it that are customer facing and you need to do it together. So that's a couple of the things that I'm seeing.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, Mike. Thanks so much for that. It makes me think of that old adage of if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? And both have their own relevancy in time and place. And there are times to do something, just put your head down and experiment and get something done, and you'll get something done quickly. But you probably can't go the marathon all on your own and rise the tide of the whole business all on your own. Mike and Craig, you all talked as well about how within your business, you inevitably have people with a variety of skills, and you've got people that have varying degrees of curiosity, power users versus kind of the opposite of that, and finding those people and teasing that out. But also that most often that won't be enough. You got to embrace the partner ecosystem, and then find a way to coexist with them. Mike, I thought you made a really good point that we see that as a service provider, that sometimes clients have an apprehension of thinking, if I bring in a third party here, am I going to have that knowledge transfer, or did they come in and they did something, I can draw a circle around it, but nobody over here understands that, right? And Craig, maybe you could just chime in a little bit about that through the lens of an Invero leader, and also just your entire career in the IT space. What have you seen? What does good look like through your eyes here?
For sure. I think the challenge, as you described it, is exactly right. There's a hesitation to engage partners because it may not be something you understand at the end of it. And Mike S is here because we've worked with you guys for a few years now in the exact opposite to that. Our scenarios, we work with customers is to basically work ourselves out of a job. We want to empower and enable our customers' teams with the skill sets that they need. And I view our role is to expedite that path. So help you get there faster. If you're waiting, like Mike T said, if you're waiting for your team to have the capacity and the time available to work on these new projects, new ideas, and experiment, you're going to be waiting a long time, or it's going to take them they're going to do dribs and drabs. They'll have a few days, 1 week, and they'll make some progress, and then they get slammed with some big project that consumes them for a month, and then they get back to it a month later. That's just normal course. I mean, every business, every person in the company is busy, and that's the challenge. So I think in identifying that opportunity, if you can get executive support, it really comes from business support or drivers from the business saying, we need to change. We need something. Maybe it's a customer experience driven initiative. Maybe it's, cost optimization or, improving processes, what have you. That driver is now going to initiate a conversation within the business and say, okay, how do we get there faster? And partners really help you get there faster. I think that's the ultimate role that we play. We don't want to, create a fiefdom that we're now going to have like a managed service for here to infinity. That's not our role. That some companies operate that way and they want to have that sustainment package, but we want to help enable, and that's we view ourselves working alongside our customers, and it's a true partnership as opposed to a vendor and a customer relationship.
Yeah, thanks for that, Craig. I'm gonna shift us here a little bit and get into the app stack a little bit. And Mike ask you a question of if you could change one thing about your present app stack, what would it be, and why is it so hard to address it?
That's a good question. Well, I think what would it be? Well, I would like to be ever more nimble in our architecture. And why is it so hard to address? It's because a good chunk of it was put together in the 90s. And, and we've had long conversations, Invero and MHS, about, well, why don't we take that legacy app and move it to Azure from where it sits today? And that there's no economic value to me to take that risk on of a lift and shift, but there's a huge value to re-engineering. And so it's that incremental chipping away at the legacy architecture in order to open it up to be componentized, to have proper API interfaces, to then be accessible to the modern app ecosystem. And that's hard. I mean, to look at a calcified 30, 20-year-old architecture and build the people who, they're not on the call and they'll probably never hear me say this, but I mean, they were well built by the patterns of the periods that they were built. They followed the playbook exactly as it was when we built on-prem or hosted solutions at a service provider. They were virtualized, use message bus for scalability, but that doesn't really break apart and move into a modern architecture all that effectively. And if there's one skill that's very, very difficult to train, I think it's thinking in architecture. That the amount of experience you need to have, the pain and agony you have to suffer, the curiosity to continuously learn, people who can understand software architectures are few and far between. People who can explain them to people who aren't software architects are even fewer and farther between. And you go to the odd conference where someone gets up on stage and explains something so well, and you say, gosh, I wish I could hire them. And you realize that's the crown jewel of wherever they are, because being able to not only understand it, but communicate it and then communicate it to different stakeholders and audiences, that's the hardest thing. So I guess I'll re-answer your question, but with a different answer. The thing I wish I had were a few more business-centric, deep technical architects who could really take and lead us to where we want to be faster than we're able to get there today.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Mike. And yeah, I hear you. It's that balance, right? Things were built a long time ago, and at the time that was the best of breed. I hear you, and you and I have had many of these conversations of just taking a monolithic legacy app that's sitting in a co-location data center and dumping that into a public cloud great. You've gotten rid of the power and all those things that you got to deal with, and that's a checkbox. But from a technology proficiency and business benefit standpoint, you didn't really accomplish anything.
Yeah.
And you may or may not have actually saved any money. You might have, but it's like this much relative to the real gain that you could go after around actually modernizing that app and turning that into real business benefit.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I think there's a mistaken belief that, and especially, so again, lucky I wear both hats and have the education experience on both sides of the business. Encourage everyone who is deep in technical, befriend your CFO and learn how the dollars flow through the business. But the practical reality is a dollar of revenue almost every last time trumps any amount of savings. That if you can show growth to the business, and every business needs to grow and needs to change and evolve. And, you say, well, why did Netflix get out of sending DVDs around? That was so sweet and lovely what they did. I mean, they had to pivot into the new realities of the world, and every business needs to go there. But earning your way to success is far superior to trying to save your way to continuity. But you'll never save your way to success. So just getting from A to B isn't going to achieve goals for me, either COO hat or CTO hat. So
Yeah.
that transformation is crucial, which means build a wall around the legacy and figure out how you can replace it. Don't try and chop it up or cut a few pennies per VM out and move on, because that's fool's errand, right? You can always find another hyperscaler who'll give you a better deal than the one that's offering you a current deal, but it doesn't change your business.
It's not modernization. There's no innovation there.
Yeah.
I like to think about it as if you were to have to cook a single chicken breast, just shutting your oven off faster once it's done, rather than just maybe using a countertop oven or an air fryer that might use 10 minutes of energy. It's until you rethink the problem statement, all you're doing is trying to squeeze as much efficiency, and you'll never get there. Unless you use the right tool for the right job. And I think that's what we need to do, is how to empower people with the right tools for the right job. I love the thing you mentioned around a dollar saved versus a dollar earned. And you'll always find that dollar of efficiency of savings, but it'll never be embraced in the same way growing top line revenue will. Never. It's just a reality. So become a profit center for the business. And that is about enabling new experiences and growth faster, not just about saving a couple pennies here and there.
Yeah, such a good point, right? Like broad strokes to all the P&L operators out there that are looking at that bottom line and thinking, how do I make it better? Directionally, you can increase your revenue or you can decrease your cost. And although decreasing cost is helpful, it can only take you so far. Like my guess, to your point, a business has to grow. And although cost reductions and just being mindful and practical about cost management is imperative in any business, of course. Of course. That's just table stakes of just running a proper business. But if that's the main event of survivability, there's an expiration to that, right? You've got to keep punching farther to how do you create those new revenue streams and what are the associated technologies to do it. Craig, I'd love to ask you, similar to Mike, all of you have these vantage points, right? Craig, your vantage point is being somebody who's worked and participated in large enterprises. You've run a business, you built a business, you've been the CTO, and you've had an opportunity to work with and see lots of different clients. What are some of the pitfalls and challenges that you've seen clients go through? And maybe that moment where they think, geez, if I could do it all over again, I might have done it a little differently. What would you say to that?
My career spans a long time, so I could say there's a lot of pitfalls. But if we keep it down to the last decade here, or the cloud era, I think the mistakes that I've seen made are actually, Mike S. talked about it. There's companies that think, well, we're moving to the cloud. They do a lift and shift, and they kind of wipe their hands and they say they're done. They've modernized. And honestly, that happens more often than you'd think. And we look at it more as it's a journey. Like that might be the first step to get your data, get your applications, get all your workloads into the cloud, so that it's less of an effort to move things around there after. But I think Mike asked, it was in preparing for this, you said something that was very, very poignant, is modernization is really all about going to a single source of truth, right? Getting all your data, whether it's surfacing through APIs or what have you, but getting things easily accessible so that you can empower and get the data into the subject matter experts or the people in the organization or the customers who need it. And you don't have these silos anymore. So I think if you look at it from a data standpoint, mistakes that I've seen made are, keeping those silos intact and saying, well, we can't touch that because that's on Oracle and this is on SQL or what have you. Like, no, break those down, go move into, and the cloud helps to enable that, to be honest, helps make it easier to break down those silos. And that's something our data practice helps customers with. Other things, other mistakes that I see made are staying with the mindset of, working within virtual machines, staying in that IaaS world. That doesn't bring the true value of the cloud. You're probably going to spend more and get less value for the long term over the long term, as opposed to moving those services and modernizing them to whether it's PaaS or containerization or microservices, breaking down the applications. There's so many more things that you can do. So I think I'll sum it up, to long-winded answer to your question, sum it up by saying the mistakes that I'm seeing made are not looking at this as a journey. It's not a one and done. Yeah, we're now in the cloud. We can pat ourselves on the back. It's what's the next step on that journey. And I'll put a little plug out there that we have a subway map, we call it internally, but it's basically a roadmap that we help customers along many different tracks. It's not just infrastructure. It's not just applications. It's not just data. There's many different paths, and they all have different stations along the metro line that intersect, and they need to have certain things done prior to that when you get to that point, and then you move on to different areas. So we kind of look at it that from the journey and the roadmap for our customers. You want to get down to the end of the line, but you can't miss all the stops along the way, is essentially the way to look at it.
Yeah, great point, Craig. I agreed. Often we see that mindset, right, of this journey to the cloud, this journey to innovation is a moment in time thing. I did it, right on, but it couldn't be farther from that, right? It's a never ending journey, and one, to go back to your point, my guess of it requires a deep rooted curiosity and endurance. And I'd love for the three of you just to riff here a little bit about some business benefits that you've seen. Mike S., you could speak to that to the degree you're comfortable with about the impacts to MHS, and Mike T. and Craig, just in general, like you see different clients. Let's talk about some high notes where there's been some successes where you can take that all the way through. We talk about $1 of revenue, and you can follow it all the way to go, wow, like that actually showed up in the client experience. We were able to offer them something new, better, extended, like whatever it is. It actually drove an incremental spend and a spend of value. Welcome any of you just to jump in on that.
We're all being polite.
Canadian stalemate. Maybe I'll set the tone from a broad perspective, and then maybe it'll make sense for where Mike and Craig jump in. I think one of the most common scenarios that I see is every company's desire to get and onboard more customers. They want to grow, to our discussion. And almost in every scenario, onboarding a new customer requires some element of the, at least developers, sometimes infrastructure team's time. That time is divided between adding new customers, building new features, and inevitably solving challenges, outages, customer issues along the way. In order to grow, you have to figure out how you find the capacity to do that in an easier way while mitigating the effort that it takes to release new features and mitigating the amount of times you're doing break fix as a team. Unless you're willing to grow the team. But that's always going to be a challenge. The organization's never going to add as many people as you need to grow your dev team, your architect team. They're always at full capacity. So I think the inevitable dialogue is, how do you start to think about the applications themselves? How do you address where they're lacking elements of performance? Because I think, to the dialogue earlier, going to the cloud largely helps you determine the flexibility to turn things on and off and to scale left to right. That's it. All those other elements of adding new customers, which is not just a scaling problem, it's a capacity problem on a finite resource within your organization, as well as managing new features and functionality at the speed at which your customers need them, whether it's for one customer or multiple, depending how you're built, and managing potential outages, you're never going to get ahead of it. And so the theme that I'm seeing is people either roll up the sleeves and start chipping away at the modernization, because it's not an on and off switch. There's elements of it. So every element of iteration gets a little bit better. Or in many cases, build the application in a cloud native modern way, architect it right, and put new customers on the new version, and then slowly figure out a migration path. I know that sounds, like from on-premise to cloud or colo to cloud. No, figure out a migration path or a cutover for your existing customers to be brought onto your new platform, which allows you to scale faster. And so the how you do it is really up to you. And I think there's some pros and cons and discussions around which, but I think the theme is everyone's trying to add new customers and grow, but are constrained by the capacity to do so because they're catering to their current customers, and their current feature list that is never ending, and their inability to invest the time to go help the company grow at the speed they desire.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, Mike, looks like you want to jump in on that as well.
Well, I was just gonna riff a little further on the excellent point that Mike T raises, which is, and I'll answer by saying I think the answer is master DevOps. That if you can bring your whole organization into a DevOps mindset, or a star ops is kind of fun now because you got AI ops and blah 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 ops, but I mean fundamentally learning DevOps as an institution, cross the board, from the CIO, CEO, everybody practicing from the same sort of process and sense of truth, building out the CI/CDs, and being able to really manage with confidence the infrastructure that you're building against. It opens up incremental releasing. And I think you can, through increments, feature flags, and a few other things, you can migrate change much faster through an organization than you could in anything else that I've ever worked and seen before. And you look and you say, well, what's thrilling about Microsoft 365 or Office 365 that wasn't there before? You used to wait 4 years to get new features when the new DVD came out and you installed it and look at all the new things. And now you don't go 48 hours without new things popping up in your different apps and spaces and all that. And I take it back and often tell people the story as I'm coaching and bringing them along. To this day, however long the iPad, App Store, Apple ecosystem has been around, I still get joy from seeing that little red icon on the App Store that tells me that a bunch of my apps are going to be upgraded if I tap that button and let it go. And I go find one new feature in the apps that I use on a regular basis. So there's no more ta-da moments where everything falls apart. I mean, all of us have been around architecture and systems long enough. The bigger the release, the bigger the disaster. Like, it just never, ever works the way you think it does. Your QA tests all of the mainline, but all of those edge cases come to get you on the first day that you release because you couldn't see and catch it all. CI/CD and being able to move feature at a time through that pipeline, feature flags in order to be able to block out things so that we're not constrained in a linear release cycle, and getting as many people thinking at the DevOps interface, at the card level, at the collaboration around that, it changes the whole way that you can modernize and release, whether you're an internal IT shop serving a college all the way out to bringing Office and Copilots to the world there. And I'll just shamelessly plug a little bit because we've got Mike T and he can take the message back to Microsoft. And the only thing I wish somebody would resolve is GitHub versus Azure DevOps, because having two not compatible DevOps paths to have to somehow stitch together and manage, and finding the features you want on the left aren't on the right, and the features that you want are on the right. Like, that is a real mess that I hope that can get cleaned up at some point. And I realize you got to pick one brand and anoint one child over the other, but that is a problem that I really hope can be addressed at some point.
I'm sure there's really smart, much smarter people than me on that, and it's oftentimes what happens when you acquire something.
Yeah.
But until then, it depends, and we'll work through what the best solution is for you.
Yeah, for sure. Gents, I'm just want to be mindful of your time and our audience's time here. One of the questions I wanted to finish with, which I think Mike and Mike, you both answered, which would be, you pre-answered it, which would be, what would you suggest to our audience, to other stakeholders, on how do you make some incremental progress? Because often people are it just feels like a lot of headwind. What would you suggest? Mike S., I think you framed it of like, embrace DevOps, like embrace that mindset. You also talked about breaking things apart as opposed to having it all stuck together. But Craig, any kind of closing words from you on advice you'd have for people out there, stakeholders, on how do you make some progress here?
Yeah, I think it's not just about the technology. App modernization is often viewed as, well, we need to, here's an application, we're going to make it cloud native. It goes way beyond that. It's all about people, process, and technology. So Mike S., you hit the nail on the head. DevOps, building a DevOps culture enables kind of that faster iterations. All the benefits that come with that are directly tied to modernization. So I think, yeah, well said already.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for this excellent panel discussion. I've really enjoyed being the panel host and moderator, and I've had a lot of fun, and I've learned a bunch through the prep and this discussion. I'm just going to close us out here. I'm going to go back to screen share here just for a couple minutes to wrap us up of how can Invero help. And a lot of this has already been kind of fluidly talked about, and really on point to some of the things that all three of you contributed to. Number one, Craig touched on this. We put together a great guide to application modernization, and we'll send that out to all of our audience members. Just a free and helpful guide that just helps you kind of walk through this and give you some iterative steps to think about. We'll go a little further here. We would love to have an app mod discovery workshop. It all starts with a conversation. Let's just have a conversation, but the conversation's probably going to lead to something around an app mod workshop, design thinking, or as Mike S. said, embrace DevOps, right? And so let's have a DevOps workshop. Let's talk that through of what does that mean. I think about how we interface with multi-health systems, and one of those areas is one of the really smart people at Invero, Davey Lau, is a DevOps guru, and how he brings that into MHS, and how there's this combined energy. I see it as a contributor to the business side of this, like combined DevOps embracing. Just real quick, what do those look like? We'll send this out to the audience. I'm mindful of time, but these are just kind of offers that help bring it all together. And I'll wrap by saying, we're having so much fun with the Invero Show. Thank you all for joining. This has been episode number 3, and we've already queued up number 4. You can see a pattern. They all weave together here. The next one we're going to talk about on April 18th is responsible AI. Everything we've talked about, all these episodes have all had a weaving of AI in them. Now we're going to look at it from the angle, and Nima, Mike T, I'm sure you know Nima very, very well. She's going to unpack this for our audience of what is responsible AI, what the heck does that mean? And what does it mean through the lens of Microsoft? And what's the role that all stakeholders, so say at a client level, what does that mean to them? What does it mean to us as a service provider, as a partner on that ecosystem? What role do we play? And then Lance is part of Team Invero. He leads our data practice. And among other things, Lance is an expert in data governance. And so he's going to look at it from that angle of how do you think about responsible AI and connect that to a data governance mindfulness conversation. So again, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. To our audience, we're really grateful for your time. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope that you got value out of this show. I'll follow up with all of you, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Invero Show. Thank you all. Have a great day.